Tranquility du Jour, April 22nd, 2019. Bask in a day-long masterclass for living life with more tranquility, creativity, and style while noshing at a world-renowned plant-based restaurant. Mingle with other members of the TDJ community and dream big. Join us for TDJ Soirée, June 9th in Washington, D.C. Limited spots remain. Learn more at KimberlyWilson.com/soiree. Hello there, this is Kimberly Wilson, and welcome to the 452nd edition of Tranquility du Jour, a podcast featuring artists, authors, and activists around the world making a difference. In this week's edition, I'm chatting with Brian Kateman about what it means to be a Reducetarian and how to make small dietary shifts, and truly how not letting perfection be the enemy of good is so critical in so many areas of our lives. I think you're going to love this podcast and love hearing from Brian. Now, before we dive in, I wanted to share a recent review that we received over on iTunes for the Tranquility du Jour podcast, and also say a big thank you to those of you who've taken the time to head on over there and leave a review or hit the button for the stars. It means a lot, and my hope, ideally, it helps others find a bit more tranquility in their day. So AG Queen B wrote, I've been listening to this podcast for years, and it's such a lovely way to help direct your day towards more creativity, tranquility, and kindness. Kimberly is an amazing inspiration for living a full, beautiful life. Her guests are delightful and equally inspirational. Can't recommend this podcast enough. Thank you so much for leaving this review. Whenever I find these over on iTunes, they always make me smile, and they mean so much because, the funny thing about a podcast is you never really know who's listening. And so, having been doing this for so many years now, 14, it's just so sweet to hear from listeners. So a big thank you for leaving that review, AG Queen B, and then also to those of you who have written in to let me know how you liked episode 450 and things along those lines. Again, it means so much. Now, for anyone who's new to Tranquility du Jour, there's a link in the show notes where you can find out more, a little start here button that'll take you right to all sorts of resources about having more tranquility in the everyday. And also, if you'd like to receive a love note, which will be coming out midweek this week, if you'd like to receive one directly to your inbox, and it's going to have all sorts of fun inspiration, and this comes out weekly to every other week, and sometimes there's podcasts and savvy sources and all sorts of things. And playlists. You can sign up for that at KimberlyWilson.com/love notes. Also, the TDJ Soirée, I wanted to share with you one woman who is coming, what she said about the why. Her name is Melinda, and her blog is resourcefulcookie.com. So she says, I'm so looking forward to attending the TDJ Soirée because Kimberly's events are always a treat for the senses and a celebration of finding the extraordinary in every day. This is an opportunity for me to disconnect and indulge in self-care while feeling pampered in every way. Best of all, is reconnecting with longtime, like-minded community members and making new friends. I always come away from TDJ events feeling relaxed, inspired, and energized. And that's Melinda, and we're so delighted to have her joining. You'll hear from others as the time goes on, because I can't believe it. We are 5 or 6 weeks out from our TDJ Soirée. And again, we have a little less than half of the tickets remaining. So if you'd like to grab one, please do so. And there's all sorts of information about the soiree over at KimberlyWilson.com/soiree. Also, anyone who's in the DC area and free on Sunday, we're hosting Pigs, Pugs, and Pinot, an event at a wine bar here in DC, and that is Sunday from 3 to 5 p.m. There's also Yoga and the Animals, which is a 4-hour event that includes a private tour of a sanctuary in Ellicott City, Maryland, and a yoga class led by moi, and a vegan lunch. And that's happening June 8th, so the day before the soiree. So those of you who are traveling from out of town, we have people coming from LA, LA, New York, the surrounding DC area, you could make a weekend of it and join us for the Yoga and the Animals event and meet some pigs and some cows and some donkeys. Also, next TDJ Live, which is a free event, is happening June 23rd. Also, if you would like to escape to Tuscany, we have a few spots left. That's happening July 13th through the 20th. And then finally, I will be up in Montreal, Canada, September 21st and 22nd, helping out with their advanced teacher training. And that is open to the public, so would love to have you join. I'm chatting mindfulness, business of yoga, and creativity. Brian Kateman is co-founder and president of the Reducetarian Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to reducing consumption of meat, eggs, and dairy to create a healthy, sustainable, and compassionate world. He's the editor of the Reducetarian Cookbook and the Reducetarian Solution. His writings have appeared in dozens of media outlets, including The Atlantic, Quartz, the LA Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Washington Post, Vox, and the New York Daily News. He's an instructor in the Executive Education Program at the Earth Institute Center for Environmental Sustainability at Columbia University. He lives in LA with his fiancé Isabel and rescue dog Tobey. Welcome, Brian.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you for creating this amazing movement called Reducetarian. So tell us about your journey to creating this movement. And what I love is the story you start with in your book about Tyler at a cafe.
Well, I grew up in Staten Island, New York, which is not known to be the most progressive of places in terms of New York City. I had never met a vegan or a vegetarian or really aspire to be vegan in the early days of my life. But I did begin to recognize in college that there were a lot of problems with factory farming, and I cared about mitigating climate change and the treatment of animals and people's health. And so I decided that I wanted to significantly cut back on animal products. And what I found in speaking to people, my friends and family, is that a lot of people had viewed meat consumption as an all or nothing premise, that you're either a vegan or you're not. And in my mind, that simply wasn't true. Every single plant-based meal that I was having was one that was better for the environment and kinder to animals and good for my health. And I worked very hard to try to persuade people of that. And my friend Tyler, who you mentioned, did too, who he himself was also trying to cut back on animal products. And what we found was that people didn't know how to communicate the fact that they were cutting back on animal products. And there wasn't really a community of people who didn't identify necessarily as vegan or vegetarian, but had decided to make some of those lifestyle changes because of the issues that they cared about. And so we came up with this term Reducetarian to really celebrate this idea that cutting back on animal products is one of the best things that an individual can do to spare farmed animals from suffering, to help mitigate climate change and stem biodiversity loss, to improve issues around non-communicable diseases like heart disease and cancer and diabetes and so on, and to recognize that whether a person is vegan or vegetarian or flexitarian, it all puts us on the same path, a path without factory farming, and that's something that we should celebrate, whether or not we're 100% vegan all the time.
What were you doing before Reducetarian?
I was very interested in the natural world. I was in college. I wanted to be an evolutionary biologist. I cared a lot about animals in the wild. And I started working at an environmental education center, helping to spread ideas and run programs around the importance of caring about issues related to biodiversity loss and climate change. And, I was really thinking about recycling and composting and bicycling. And while I was getting a master's in conservation biology, and I realized that I had given very little thought into factory farming, and a lot of my colleagues didn't think much about factory farming either. And when I realized that and how bad factory farming is, not just for the environment, but for many other issues that I care about, I decided to kind of pivot my focus and work as hard as possible to build the Reducetarian movement. So that was kind of my transition into building the Reducetarian Foundation.
One of the pieces that you talk about too in the intro is Michael Pollan's quote, "Eat food, not too much, mostly plants." And I'm sure a lot of our listeners have read or come across this quote. I love it. It's so clear and concise. And I'm curious, how has it had an impact on you and the message that you're sharing?
Definitely. It's interesting that so many leaders in the food movement who I think have been most instrumental in raising issues around factory farming and encouraging people to significantly cut back of animal products, at least in the mainstream, don't necessarily identify as vegan. And I view Michael Pollan and Mark Bittman and many others as being in that camp. I think the challenge is that sometimes there's a tendency, even with that quote, to view someone who's 100% vegan and let's say a person who eats mostly plants as being different from one another, because we know that issues around meat consumption are so polarizing, in part because the issues at stake are so dire and serious. But in my mind, a person who eats mostly plants, as Michael Pollan indicates, and a person who's vegan have so much in common. The average person in the United States, for example, eats well over 200 pounds of meat per year. And if there's someone who's eating 0 pounds of meat per year and let's say 5 pounds of meat per year, let's say someone is eating mostly plants, those two people have so much more in common with each other. And one of the most important things I think that we can do as individuals and how we relate to others is to emphasize our commonality, what we have in common, what we share with one another, and to celebrate those successes rather than getting caught up in what I perceive to be minor differences. And so I think the value of the Reducetarian concept is really to unite that kind of thinking, the idea of a person eating mostly plants with the idea of a person going 100% vegan, and to kind of broaden the movement to include as many people as possible who agree with that idea and that premise.
Do you feel like it's been a hard road, though, to pave of getting kind of buy-in with people who feel like there's only one way to do things?
Really hard. And I think, in some ways it's interesting in relation to our politics and our dialogue. In some cases, it's gotten worse in different domains to see people as good people, despite the fact that they might disagree around approaches. When I started the Reducetarian movement, I think it was really controversial. It's always the case that the loud ones seem to dominate. I'm sure in reality, most people were quite accepting and tolerant of the idea. But when it first started, it was pretty controversial. I would get messages from some vegans who were very angry about this concept, that they felt it was watering down their message. And I understood their point, again, given how much I hate factory farming and our treatment of animals and so on. But, with time, it seems to me that it's become a lot more accepting to be a part of the Reducetarian movement. And I think there's really a really, really small minority of people who disagree with the idea that we should encourage people to cut back on animal products and not get so caught up in what I often refer to as vegan purity. So I'm very excited that there's been this kind of shift. And I think it will continue as we see more plant-based alternatives on the market, as we see more people who identify as flexitarians, people who don't necessarily go vegan, but do continue to eat more and more plant-based foods. I think this kind of sentiment is going to become more and more accepted, and it's simply the reality, So I'm really excited and enthusiastic and happy that there's been such a shift in thinking.
Now, with your book, The Reducetarian Solution, you break up the essays into mind, body, planet. And I'm curious, would you share maybe from each of these categories one essay that impacted you in particular?
It's really hard for me to choose a favorite essay because I love all of them so much, but let's try. In terms of the section on the mind, I really learned a lot from many of the writers who dived into this idea that there are so many hidden forces as to why we eat as much meat as we do. We take for granted at times that there are so many reasons why people eat as much meat as they do. Most people don't choose food based on ethics or environmental reasons or even their own health. They choose food based on price, on taste, and on convenience, and to some extent social norms, what people are eating around them. And so a bunch of the essays in that section kind of delve into that topic. I really like Mark Todorowska's essay on why we crave meat. In the first place, looking at it from an evolutionary perspective and some of these cultural norms that we're seeing. In terms of the section on the body, I also really like Stringer's essay on human evolution, because there's kind of this idea that we were designed to eat meat from a kind of evolutionary perspective, and that we don't have a choice. This is kind of the paleo myth. And I loved learning about the accuracies of our real relationship with meat over time. And kind of the conclusion of that essay was that, yes, we've had a dependency on meat in the past, but because we're omnivorous, we're very flexible in what we can eat. And so we don't necessarily need to have meat in our diet. And then on the planet side and section, I really liked Graham Hill's essay on weekday vegetarianism. And I think I like that essay so much because the idea of a weekday vegetarian or vegan before 6 or meatless Monday, these are all easy strategies that people can undertake if they're interested in cutting back on animal products. And it's a really great way to start. For many people, unfortunately, veganism and vegetarianism can be intimidating, in part because of all of these reasons why it's so ingrained in our society to eat as much meat as we do. But Graham Hill's essay and some of the other essays in that section provide really simple, easy strategies for beginning. And I think, if you're a vegan or a vegetarian and you're listening to this and you have friends who are omnivores, you can recommend these kinds of strategies to help get people started. And of course, the hope is that they'll discover how joyful and easy it is, and that perhaps they'll even go further and become vegetarian or vegan in the future. So the Reducetarian Solution, in my mind, is a great primer and beginning and start for someone who's not that familiar with the issues around the problems with factory farming and why it is that we eat so many animal products, and provides them with simple tools to make the transition, however they define it.
Speaking of transition, that's so you recently released a cookbook, and I saw that one criticism of it is like, oh, well, I thought there was going to be more on how do I make the transition? And I'm curious if you've thought about that as a way of like, okay, how do we, because I feel like you give suggestions and tips on that, but maybe people needed more of a step-by-step process. Is that feedback you've gotten throughout?
I think there are just some people who, I think people were maybe confused, or there was a sort of confusing element to it. But in my mind, the Reducetarian Solution provided some of the kind of strategies and background needed to sort of be thinking about these issues, whereas the cookbook is really just mainly a cookbook. It has vegan recipes that are very easy. They're meant to be simple meals that people crave in their everyday life. So, French toast and pancakes for breakfast that don't have eggs or dairy in them, they're vegan. Buffalo cauliflower instead of buffalo wings, the kind of regular food that everyday people are used to eating, but kind of putting a vegan switch on it. And it does have some introductory content on different ingredients and tools that you might need in the house. I kind of wrote the book as someone myself. I'm not an expert in cooking. I don't cook all the time. I think of my friends who have 20 minutes to cook a meal. So I was kind of thinking of myself as a target audience. I want to be able to cook and make delicious vegan meals in a hurry. And that's really what the book is about. So the Reducetarian Solution and the cookbook are definitely complementary. And I would suggest if a person is ready to simply get in the kitchen and start cooking some vegan meals, the Reducetarian Cookbook is a great one. The framing is all about it being for people who don't necessarily identify as vegans. And the same as with the Reducetarian Solution. So yeah, it's hard to fit everything into one book. And that's why there's so many great vegan books on there, so many books that are essential reading for folks who want to make the change in a big way. And so I hope the Reducetarian Solution, the Reducetarian Cookbook is just one contribution in a world of great material for folks that want to cut back on the amount of animal products that they consume.
Yeah, and I think you raise a good point. And it's like, okay, so the Reducetarian Solution is kind of like 1.0, and then the cookbook is like, okay, and here's some ways to incorporate this and recipes and what have you. And I guess if you just pick up a cookbook and you're really excited about Reducetarianism, and you're like, how do I begin this process? And, it's a slow journey, but I think for a lot of people, they are looking for a play-by-play of sorts. And as you're right, it's out there, and you probably touch on it in many places, even on your website and whatnot. So I just thought it was interesting that it's like someone would pick up a cookbook and be like, this doesn't help me as a meat eater transition,
Right. Well, I think it just underscores how challenging it is to make any dietary change. I mean, I've been trying to meditate for years, and I believe in meditation, and I want to meditate more. And I struggle to do it because I'm busy and I don't prioritize it, and because it's scary. And, we all have these habits that are difficult to break. And we try to sort of hack the system to make it as easy as possible for people. That's what we're all trying to do, is to make it easier for people to make the right sort of choice, or the choices that are in their interest, the interest of the planet. But the reality is that it's really difficult and challenging. And when I receive feedback like that, it just makes me feel even more empathy and compassion for people who are not vegan, because it underscores just how difficult it is. And I think that's really what the core of the kind of Reducetarian philosophy is. It's about kindness. It's about being kind to everyone, vegans, non-vegans, the planet, animals. It's about understanding that the system right now, it sucks. It's really problematic, and there are a lot of issues at stake, but we have to understand where people are coming from and meet people in the middle and recognize our humanity and the world that we live in. And so I hope all of the resources that we're putting it out are, make it easier for people. But I think that feedback is also useful, because it really does underscore how difficult it is for folks to not just go vegan, but simply cut back on the amount of animal products that they consume.
Right. Great reminders. And I love the underlying idea of kindness and compassion. It's so critical. And then it's just so ironic when it's missing from a movement that is all about that.
I agree with you. And I always understand it. I gave a speech at the Animal Rights Conference, and I think it was 2017. And I was protested. With my own people. I want a vegan world. I care about animals tremendously. Sometimes when people have overlapping concerns, they can engage in what is called horizontal hostility. This idea that we tend to elevate our differences, no matter how small they are, to such a degree that we lose sight of how much we have in common. And this is very common in social movements. And I understand why, because when you think about the 70 billion land animals, when you think about the acceleration of climate change and biodiversity loss, when you think about your loved ones, how they're maybe suffering from heart disease or cancer or diabetes and obesity, in part because of what they're eating, I understand why it is that the kind of emphasis on understanding can go out the window in light of some of the issues that we consider to be so dire. But in my mind, we need each other. We need each other because we're all on the same team. We have a lot in common in comparison to the average person. Many people don't care at all about factory farming. Many people are not eating any fruits or vegetables, or very small amounts. I think it's around 10% of people get the recommended fruit and or vegetable intake in their diet in the United States. And so we need each other because we're a small movement right now, and we're kind of a niche issue. But the good news is it's starting to change. We're starting to see more success. We're seeing factory farming more in the headline. We're seeing more plant-based alternatives on the market. And I really believe that despite whatever strategic differences we have, or even ideologies, even if a person doesn't necessarily want a vegan world, there's so much more that we can do together than apart from one another. And it's my hope that we will continue to focus on our commonality rather than get caught up in what I consider to be small differences between one another.
Well, and this leads me to my next question about your summit that's happening in September here in Washington, D.C. So when we think about what we can do together, I love that you're putting this on, and I will be there with bells on. And so can you talk a little bit about that and, what people can expect?
I love the Reducetarian so much because it's this magical place where people who are vegan, vegetarian, flexitarian, just beginning to cut back on animal products, perhaps motivated by environmental issues or human health issues or animal welfare issues, simply excited about food technology, come together and unite on this very important premise that we need to work together in order to end factory farming, we need to work together in order to significantly reduce the amount of animal products that our society consumes. And we really specifically say that we're going to put our small differences aside and be incredibly pragmatic and do whatever we can to make a dent in advancing those goals. And so much of the summit has panels and workshops on the different kinds of tools that we can use to advance that mission, whether it be in the realm of food technology or policy or communications, investing and philanthropy, and so on. We are really there to get to work to figure out how we're going to do this together. And we have a plant-based expo where there's lots of plant-based companies that provide samples of the delicious plant-based products. We have amazing speakers, lots of networking opportunities. The ticket prices are intentionally very inexpensive so that anyone who wants to attend can do so. We have about 650 people or so who attend each year. And I really believe that our movement can be a lot bigger if we're willing to embrace this idea that we can make the tent larger, that we can allow people who don't necessarily identify as vegan or vegetarian to join us, to allow people who are maybe not excited about animal issues, but are excited about climate change or really care about people's health. We're so lucky that there are so many reasons to end factory farming, and we can leverage that as an opportunity to bring together people from all walks of life into our movement. And the summit is really the place where that happens. So I continue to really love that event and program. And I'm so happy that we're going to be in Washington, D.C. this year. And I'm looking forward to seeing you and everyone else who will be in our presence.
Yes, I can't wait. And listeners, I'll have a link to the summit so you can grab a ticket too. And as you said, it's a great ticket price. I mean, I was blown away. So thank you so much, Brian, for offering this.
Of course. Thank you.
And my last question for you, Brian, the name of this podcast is Tranquility du Jour. And so I'm curious, you mentioned trying a little meditation. You clearly focus on what you put into your body. But I'm curious, how do you find tranquility or seek tranquility in your everyday?
As soon as you asked me that question, I thought of my dog, Tobey, to be honest with you. I find that in the moments in which I'm stressed or overwhelmed or angry or sad or feeling some kind of extreme emotion, whenever I'm with Tobey, when I'm petting Tobey, when she's licking my face, when we're walking together, I feel so incredibly grounded in the moment. And I think the secret to my relationship or our relationship with companion animals can also be extended to humans. I find them when I'm with people who I love, people who add a value to my life, people who are good people. I find that I'm kind of get out of my head and I feel a sense of hope and inspiration and joy. And it's in part because the Reducetarian movement has so many amazing, inspiring people in it, just simply good people who want the world to be better than it is today. And so that's in part where I find tranquility, but it's hard. It's really hard when you care about these issues and you see what's going on. At times it can feel dark. And so I do think that there's value in meditation. And I really hope that I can start bringing that more into my life. And really this idea of self-care, I think, is is one that's resonated with me because I've had moments where I just really work nonstop and then I'm kind of shot. I'm tired. I'm cranky. I feel less motivated. And when you are really passionate about an issue, that can sometimes happen. But when I think about the long term, I want us as a movement to not just take care of the planet or other people or the animals, but take care of ourselves so that we can do this for a long time and not have burnout. And so go on, take breaks and go on vacation and so on. It's really important. And I think that was something that was missing in my life when I first started the Reducetarian movement. And there are people like yourself and others who have really emphasized that self-care or tranquility, or however you define it, is really important. So self-care is also a part of the Reducetarian Summit. We've added a meditation session. I'm vowing that I'll be there this year to attend that because I need it. There's a yoga session. So yes, we need more tranquility in our lives. And I thank you for having a podcast that emphasizes that. And I hope all the listeners will do that and encourage other people to not just fight for the fights, but also take care of themselves.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's like compassion fatigue, right? It's a real thing. And listeners, I will put some links to information about working with that because, self-care, it goes so much deeper, especially when we're talking burnout. So thank you. Brian, thank you so much for being here with us today and for this amazing work that you're doing and putting out into the world. So, so grateful.
That's very kind of you. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all that you do too.
You can find Brian online, and in the show notes, I've got tons of links, including to his website, reducetarian.org, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, also his books, The Reducetarian Solution and The Reducetarian Cookbook, and to his blog. You'll find lots of great articles, some that I've even been posting over and sharing over at TDJ Eat Plants, which is a private Facebook group, and anyone is welcome to join. Just ask to join and I will approve you. And what we have there is all sorts of kind of recipes and tips and tools on actually eating more plants. So less processed, more plants in our diets. And also a heads up that it is the launch of Veg Week today, which is a 7-day veg pledge kind of gathering that happens through Compassion Over Killing every April. And so I have a link to that also over in the show notes. So you can find out more if you'd like to take the Veg Pledge and join along with us. Also, there's a link to the summit, which I'm so excited about. That's happening in September here in the DC area. And then a TEDx talk that he did. And I think you'll find it inspiring. So there's a link to all this in the show notes. And again, the show notes can be found at KimberlyWilson.com/452. Tranquility du Jour online. You can find a link to my brand new book, Year of Tranquility, that came out in January. And it comes with 5 bonuses. That's KimberlyWilson.com/YOT. Also, there's a link to Instagram. We were just up in Cape May over the weekend, and there's lots of fun photos from that adventure. Also, follow along on Facebook. You'll find me at Tranquility du Jour, and also videos on YouTube. So again, there's a link to all of this in the show notes, along with a link to Tranquility, which is my seasonless, vegan, locally made, eco-friendly fashion line. And if you're not on the mailing list, be sure to jump on that, tranquility.com, and that's Tranquility without a Y, because tomorrow there will be an Earth Day promo blast heading your way. Also, there's a link to e-courses, the app, so you can have all the back episodes of Tranquility du Jour on your phone, in your pocket, and then also read about my passion for animals. Finally, if you have a moment to review this podcast on iTunes and or share it via social media, would be so grateful. Also, if you have a moment to pin a review of any of my books on Amazon or Goodreads, would be very, very grateful. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I wish you a wonderful week ahead. Head on over, take that Veg Pledge if you can, and I hope you'll consider adopting a Reducetarian diet. Namaste.